We're delighted to have you here today. This is really exciting. My name is Sarah Reed Harris, and I'm the Managing Director at the Center for Interfaith Relations. And on behalf of our Board of Directors and our brilliant staff, I welcome you tonight to this unbelievably unprecedented opportunity to have our faith leaders and our arts and culture leaders discuss, have conversations on meaning. So we're delighted to have you here. All of this is possible through the extraordinary partnerships possible in this city, uniquely in this city, and they include the Louisville Orchestra, the Center for Performing Arts, Louisville Public Media, Wanda Wilcox, who helped provide the food and the drink in the backs, and especially our faith leaders represented in the Catholic and the Jewish communities of Louisville. Conversations like the one that we're having tonight and the types of conversations that we feature at the Festival of Faiths are essential to the promotion of healthy communities. These enable us to have authentic relationships of mutual understanding. Because of this community's history in celebrating our differences as well as our unity, we were able today to witness this outpouring of love for the mosque on River Road today. And part of that community is from years and years and years of conversations on meaning like the one that we're having tonight. So to share a few more words from our leadership at the Center for Interfaith Relations, I'm delighted to introduce Christy Lee Brown.
Hi. It is such an honor to be here today, and following up on what Sarah so beautifully said, I would love for us just to take a moment of silence to reflect on the psychological, spiritual damage that has been done at the mosque, and how each of us has a role in inviting those that were so unfortunate to have done that act to find ways for us to personally invite them to come into conversation with us. Conversation like we will have tonight on another subject, but all related to kindness and to caring and to sharing. God bless all of us and all of those who are filled with anger. And I think what we need to help each other do is to find the ways, as the Mass, I believe, will do, to find the ways of finding our commonalities, finding the ways of our love, and allowing the magnificent leadership of Teddy and the Louisville Orchestra to inspire us in new kinds of ways. So thank you so much for being here, and it's an honor to introduce Dan Gilliam, who I consider the voice of culture, our voice of music, and our voice of healing. So Dan, thank you for all that you do for our community, and I'll give you this.
I have my own here, but thank you. I appreciate that. You can keep that one. Thank you, Christy, very much. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion on the spiritual implications of Leonard Bernstein's Mass. I'm Daniel Gilliam from Louisville Public Media. Teddy Abrams is music director of the Louisville Orchestra. His 2015-16 season includes debuts with the Houston, Phoenix, and Edmonton symphonies, and a return to the San Francisco Symphony. Recent guest conducting highlights include engagements with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Indianapolis Symphony, the Florida Orchestra, the Jacksonville Symphony, and the Louisiana and New Mexico Philharmonics. He served as assistant conductor of the Detroit Symphony from 2012 to 2014. Cantor David Lipp came to congregation Adath Jeshurun as Hazan in 1994. He has established a reputation as an inspiring leader of worship and transmitter of Jewish musical tradition, ancient to contemporary. He currently leads worship services, prepares youth for bar and bat mitzvah, teaches synagogue skills to children and adults, co-officiates all life cycle events, and does pastoral work and directs the adult choir at Adath Jeshurun. The Reverend David Sanchez was born in Caguas, Puerto Rico. As a child, he developed a passion for the arts and the sciences, and he holds a double BA in math and psychology, and also an MPH degree in biostatistics. He joined the U.S. Army, where he was commissioned as a chaplain candidate and a paratrooper, and was stationed at Fort Bragg. He is the pastor of St. Joseph Catholic Church in Butchertown. Father Sanchez has become a popular figure at the University of Louisville, where he conducts a candlelight mass each weekend that draws a full house of students. Please welcome our panelists today. There's the famous story of Sam Bernstein, Leonard's father, being questioned by reporters after his son's famous last-minute Carnegie Hall debut. They wondered why he didn't want to pay for LB's piano lessons when he was a kid. His reply, well, how was I supposed to know he'd turn into Leonard Bernstein? Leonard Bernstein was born in Lawrence, Massachusetts. He went to Harvard and the Curtis Institute of Music and held a long association with Tanglewood. It was there in 1940 where he met the famous conductor Serge Koussevitzky and became his conducting assistant. In 1958, he became music director of the New York Philharmonic. He was awarded a Lifetime Achievement from the Grammys in 1985. He turned down an opportunity to host Saturday Night Live, an invitation made personally by Chevy Chase and Lorne Michaels. He was and still remains an American icon. Ned Rorem called Bernstein America's first Jewish composer. Of course, there were other Jewish composers, but Leonard Bernstein spoke the Jewish faith through his art. He was descendant of rabbis, and his first and third symphonies are centered around Jewish themes and texts. Leonard Bernstein wasn't the first to take a liturgy and modify it using non-liturgical texts. Brahms did this with his German Requiem, adapting German biblical text instead of the traditional Requiem Latin Mass. Benjamin Britten intersperses poems of Wilfred Owens in his War Requiem. And this also wasn't Bernstein's first foray into liturgical or religious music. He composed his Chichester Psalms in 1965 and then would go on to write another mass, a much shorter mass, in the late 80s, in addition to the two symphonies already mentioned. Mass was commissioned by Jacqueline Kennedy in September of 1971. It includes text from the Latin Mass and original words of Leonard Bernstein, of Stephen Schwartz, and also Paul Simon. It's a musically ecumenical work with moments that are jazzy, that are bluesy, rock, there's atonal, there's tonal music, there's everything. It's a work that truly encapsulates Leonard Bernstein's being. Burton Bernstein, Leonard's brother, said of his sibling that he loved experimenting with the new, even though he was a hopeless traditionalist. He welcomed the avant-garde, but he cherished the pristine, lovely tune, the simple song. So with that being said, and knowing a little bit about Leonard Bernstein, tell me about your first exposure to Leonard Bernstein as a person or as a composer or conductor. And any one of you can jump in.
I'm Puerto Rican, West Side Story. And I was not born yet, right? But it's a piece that really represents the struggle of the Puerto Ricans in New York, and the passion the Puerto Ricans have for their culture and the flavor as people of faith. Mm-hmm. And how, the mix of the music that he brought. And last night I was watching one of the wonderful videos how West Side Story was made. And he took all the singers to his apartment in New York. It's a beautiful video. And he recorded the cantors in his house, singing Maria, for example, and the other pieces. And that for me was impressive, that he brought them to his home to bring the flavor of and he had this conversation with the musicians. It's a beautiful part of the video that one of the trumpetists challenged him and said, "That's not the way you play it," And that was very powerful for me to see, and he's continued the conversation even with the musicians.
Mm-hmm. Cantor Lipp?
I would say also West Side Story. First of all, as a music student, if we wanted to learn how to sight sing a tritone, we all had to learn Maria, because it starts with a tritone. But I think later on, when I learned that originally, when they were first thinking of how to do this show, they thought of it as between a Jewish family and a Catholic family. And if you listen to the very first notes of the overture, when I first heard this, and then I was told about it, and then I thought about it, it was so obvious to me, but until you don't think about it. But the first sounds are the sounds of a shofar. And they left, it's almost archaeological, like he left that in there even after it wasn't about that particular topic. But I would say that for me, that was my first encounter with Bernstein.
What about you, Teddy?
We almost had East Side Story.
That's right. That was right.
That was
Started as
actually going
That's
to be
right.
called that.
It was East Side Story.
I'm sure when
that's
he
Lower
started
East Side Story.
Yeah, what Jewish gang could we model this on? Quickly realized it's not a very realistic plot.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's right.
actually, it's not through his own compositions that I got to know Bernstein, but through a recording I played over and over and over again of Bernstein narrating Peter and the Wolf. And I just remembered so distinctly this voice that comes on. The very first words are, "Hello, this is Leonard Bernstein." And of course, it's an incredible. I mean, his presence comes through just his speaking voice. It's extraordinary. And I just remembered feeling some connection and care for this man. And then that only developed after I started working with my own mentor growing up, Michael Tilson Thomas, who was a student of Leonard Bernstein's. And so Bernstein is, I guess, my grand teacher.
Yeah.
I like to say.
Yeah. Now, can you talk just briefly about your own personal faith? What do you believe, and maybe how did you arrive at these beliefs?
Start with
you,
me.
Peter Lipp.
So the word Israel in Hebrew means God struggler. And it comes from the story of Jacob on the mountain the night before he has to see his brother that he's estranged from for the last 20 years. And he's afraid that his brother is frankly going to kill him. So he struggles with, it says in the Bible, he struggles with a man. But most commentators understand that man to be either a manifestation of his conscience, of God, or of kind of like a spiritual Esau doppelganger, as it were. And this struggle is one that I think that every Jew, regardless of whether they're Orthodox or Reform or somewhere in between like I am, struggles with our concept of what God means, depending on what's happening in our lives, what's happening in the world. And I would say that's kind of the basis of how I approach my particular monotheistic Jewish faith, has to do with struggling with those concepts, struggling with when does ritual make sense, when do ethics trump those rituals. So I mean, I pull from both sides.
Yeah. What about you, Father Sanchez?
I always give a sense of via positiva, talking in Latin. In my tradition, even with struggle, I believe in hope. And that's what makes me who I am as a preacher. I always say the day I cannot give hope to the people, I will not be a priest. And there's a true challenge every day because we're human beings and we struggle as human beings. But I need to bring the hope to the people, that common approach to Christ every day.
And you, Teddy?
And this is not something I don't really talk about this much in public, but I guess you could call me a Lennyistic Jew. Okay. Because culturally, I'm extremely Jewish. You can't seem to shake it, so that's who I am. And but religiously, I am not. Now, I'll admit it, I don't go to temple on a regular basis. I'm not a practicing Jew. I have incredible respect for the tradition and the incredible, just the magnificent, when you think about it, generations that have been strung together for thousands of years that lead up to who I am right now and what that means. And I guess there's a kind of spiritual element in and of that. But I think when it comes to thinking about the world from the spiritual lens, it probably aligns very much along the same thinking that Bernstein espouses in this particular piece, which is one of the reasons I feel so closely connected to it. And we'll talk about that, why the message is actually so much broader than any one single denomination or single religion. It actually is about kind of our common humanity. And so that's why I say the Lennyistic.
Lennyistic, I like it.
Lennyistic.
We're here to talk about the spiritual implications of Leonard Bernstein's Mass, which kind of seems like an overly obvious statement, right? It's a Mass, so by definition it has to be spiritual, or at the very least religious. But it's full of contradictions, and there are a lot of jarring moments in this piece. There are a lot of probably jarring moments to your personal faith. And I just wonder if you can talk about how you reconcile those moments that could offend others, or could offend maybe your own parishioners or people who attend your synagogue. I mean, how do you reconcile these?
Well, I guess my first concern when I first actually went online to watch the whole thing through, because I'd never actually seen it live, I was a little bit uncomfortable that kind of a Jewish trio, as it were, Leonard Bernstein, he brought in Stephen Schwartz to write the lyrics, and also Paul Simon for that quatrain, which I thought was fascinating. It was a Christmas present. I thought that in and of itself. So you have these three Jewish people writing a very challenging spiritual work on a Christian text, and I felt Jewishly, I feel that it's appropriate to be self-critical, but I have a certain amount of discomfort with the fact that he chose a Catholic text upon which to place his theological challenges. That said, I don't, and again, I'm psychologizing somebody who's not here anymore to actually answer, but my sense is because he was doing this in honor of his friend Kennedy, and it was a celebration of him, and he was Catholic, and I think there was no other that I can think of aesthetic Catholic expression upon which he could kind of paint with his, with his incredible combination of classical and atonal and West Side Story kinds of themes, to actually use something, a scaffolding as it were, upon which to write theological challenges that I think apply, I think as Teddy said, to pretty much any monotheistic or really any spiritual person. I think he's merely using it as a scaffolding. Now, again, I'm not a Catholic. I might be offended if I was a Catholic that a Jewish person was doing that. If I'm looking at it, however, from the perspective of how do you theologically challenge these issues, I think that he does it in a way. His actual theological challenges are not ones that bother me. I think they're ones that Jews are used to using and are arguments that we're used to making.
Well, so Father Sanchez, let me reframe the question then. What if one of your parishioners came to see Mass next weekend and then came to you afterwards and said, I can't believe they did that? Well, how would you address that?
And I would say, as I say at the end of every Mass, the Mass is ended, go in peace.
And he really pushes that.
How pastoral.
And he really pushes that too.
And it's true, because if you are Catholic and you really understand the struggle of the Eucharistic prayer, we celebrate the passion, the death, the resurrection, the ascension of the Lord, returning to his Father. And the Mass always ends in peace. And I think that what Bernstein did very well. If I'm going to criticize him, I think he made the priest too human to express his anger. And people know that we're human beings. And at that time, at that period in the 70s, I think he was vanguard, I would say. And he challenged us to believe that priest is human. He has struggles every day. Of course, he will be angry with the people. But I cannot allow that to come out at the Eucharistic prayer. Because in persona Christi, I have to reconcile the struggles of every person. Therefore, for me, it's powerful to say the Mass is and they go in peace. We have being the exile. We cross the Black Sea. We come together as a nation, but we're still struggling today. And as a Catholic, Jesus brought that peace and this comfort that we have as human beings.
Now, Teddy, as being the non-clergyman up here in the panel, how would you feel if someone came up to you after the performance and said, I was really offended by moments in this Mass? How would you approach that as an artistic person and music director?
Well, that's great. And actually, I might even say the way we approach the piece beforehand is going to determine how people will react to it during and after. And if you go in, I think, and I've been struggling with this a lot because I've been wondering, part of the power of the piece is not knowing what to expect and being presented with this extraordinary artistic vision. That's part of the power, but on the other hand, just like any work of art, your familiarity and knowledge of the work and knowledge of the context of it obviously will contribute immensely to your understanding and appreciation of it. But it's not necessary, and in some ways the shock that happens in this piece, and I'll say just to backtrack so you know what we're talking about, this is not an actual Mass. This has the elements of any Mass, that has the words of any Mass in Latin, but it is not an actual Mass. This is not where you're not getting your communion here. This is a theatrical Mass. This is a theatrical piece called Mass. So it involves a Mass. It's almost as if the setting is a Mass, and so you're actually in the audience watching the Mass, but it's actually a piece of theater that just happens to take place during a Mass. And so interspersed throughout all the parts that are supposed to happen in a Mass are theater elements, are the struggles and in English, the very human elements of one's confronting of our mortality, of our existence in the universe. And that leads to a major breakdown later on in the piece that normally would not take place in a Mass, of course, right? So I would actually I would actually argue that it's how we present this and how we set it up. If you're not aware that this is a theatrical Mass, then we've done something wrong. If you're going in, and I actually was a little concerned because I was at your church and somebody asked me if we're going to perform the Mass at your church. I thought,
Why not?
why not?
Why not?
Oh, this is not like the Bach B minor Mass.
Correct.
Or it's not like the Mozart Coronation Mass where you're actually hearing a Mass. That's the real deal.
There's a historical event here that's happening in the 70s. Remember, the Catholic Church has abandoned the Latin. The music is changing to the vernaculars by regions. Now, if you go to Puerto Rico in the 70s, the guitars and the bongos and the congas are coming into church. And people start leaving masses because no more Latin. That's my grandmother's experience. And she became Baptist, how these people can have guitars and drums and congas in my Catholic church. But remember, this is happening also in the United States. How the Catholic on New Orleans were bringing jazz into the Mass. How the African Americans in the United States are bringing congas and bongos to their worship. Therefore, there's a transformation here. Bernstein bring rock and roll. And it was the art that he loved, the music from the United States. I think today is more progressive if you go to a Catholic church. And you will expect a rock and roll, electronic guitar Mass. And I have one at the Spanish Mass. But imagine that electronic guitar in 1970. The Hispanic people are crazy, right? But for me, it's normal to see the drums at the Spanish Mass, or the Peruvian instrument, the drums and boxes that they bring. That's part of the culture, enculturation of the church. I have an opportunity in July to go to France, and I did it with all the intention because of this Mass that we're going to see 26. I took 2-hour train from Paris to Chablis in Paris, and I visited an abbey, the Abbey of St. Peter Solesmes. And this monk had been singing the same Mass set from 800 years ago. And I want to hear them. I will not call it a performance, that was true Mass. But it was a performance to me. I said, let me compare that particular Mass 800 years ago, and I get out empty. And I say, I was a priest at that time, have a meaning for me, but now living in 2015, doesn't mean anything to me. Even I'm a Catholic priest like them. Therefore, music have a sense of spirituality of the present generations. And I think Bernstein did that when he bring faith and hope to bring peace. And that's what the context of this Mass that he bring together to the Kennedys. Just we struggle, we have a faith in one God, but we hope as a people to build his kingdom all together, that we can have peace with ourselves and with one another. And that is, to me, the beauty of this particular Mass. He is human. And he brings that peace to us. And you will be, as I watch the videos, you will be like, oh God, what is this? You know, you will be nervous. Your feelings are going to be shocked through this performance. But it's okay. Okay, it's going to be fine. And I say again, there is going to be peace in our heart. There was a struggle in the 70s, was the war. You know, these people in conflict. Last night I was reading something beautiful that Bernstein invited a Jesuit priest to help him to write this Mass and help him with the liturgy. And that priest was Father Daniel Barrigan, a Jesuit. And you will say, oh my God, who, you know him. He was in the top 10 list of the FBI, most wanted Americans. But it's interesting that he and his brother Philip and Thomas Merton create the Interfaith Coalition against the Vietnam War. Therefore, they are struggling, they have these fears, they have these anxieties, but they want to bring the world to peace. And that's what is beautiful about this Mass, when I decided to see it September 26th, right?
And it's the same way.
It's the same way.
Go in peace.
And we go in peace.
Well, in her words about her father's Mass, Jamie Bernstein said that it's a breakdown, this Mass is a breakdown of a populace searching for a trustworthy government, and a breakdown of a leader clinging to power, a breakdown of an artist searching for an inner meaning. And so, Teddy, I wonder if you could maybe reflect a little bit on Jamie's words on this Mass.
Well, and that's a really amazing insight, that this Mass can mean many, many different things. And so just to give you context for what it actually is, this is a very large-scale work. As I said, it's a theatrical Mass that includes parts for very diverse instrumentation and diverse singers. So you have a full choir. Actually, you mentioned the word scaffolding. They'll be on scaffolding. That's our set. Because they're a huge choir that represents the church choir. They usually sing in Latin. Only a couple times do they not. And they sing what you would actually find in any standard Mass for thousands of years, the same exact words. And then you have a group called the street chorus. They sing almost always in English, and those people are us. That is the human experience. The street chorus, although they often form a choir group, are also all soloists. They all get solo roles. And then there's the orchestra, which includes everything from a marching band to a rock band, a blues band, the full regular orchestra. It's huge. But the point is that this street choir is kind of us. And they go through a questioning, they go through this confrontation with faith, with meaning, with what it means to be alive, and the implications of a large universe and existence. And they question that both on a personal level, on a cosmic level, throughout the entire piece. And it grows to a real kind of extraordinarily revolutionary point, a genuine revolution. And it's because of that giant theatrical scale that you can see the piece in so many different ways. You could see it as, in fact, just what's going on stage. A congregation that is really kind of losing control, that because of the questions of being alive, the immense questions that are not really answerable, these people are getting out of control and eventually revolt. You could see it that way. You could see it as a metaphor for what people are actually thinking while they're being told to think a certain way, or being asked to think a certain way out of either tradition or just religious practice. You could see it as a metaphor for geopolitical relationships. You could see it as a metaphor for race relationships in America. All of these were issues that Bernstein was passionate about, very, very passionate about. And that's the brilliance of the piece. That the criticism of it at the time it was premiered was that it was a dated piece of music already. It was a period piece. Nobody that went to the premiere, some of the really famous conductors that were there, the ones I've talked to, they didn't want to conduct this piece. It's only in my generation and the one right above me that they've wanted to actually conduct this and bring it back. But the criticism was that it already was dated when it was composed, that it was already somehow of its time and not relevant in the future. But as I've been going back and seeing this in a Jamie Bernstein metaphorical fashion, it seems like it's all the more relevant to the same exact questions about society, about politics, about relationships both in our personal world and our faith world and our just human world. They are the exact same issues. And I think that, just like you were saying, that the form of something can exist for thousands of years, but perhaps in fact many generations, but the actual content and the sounds of it can grow and change, and great art is supposed to do that. So that's how I'd say it, and that's the brilliance of it. It does not matter what your background is. You could be anything from the strongest hardcore atheist to a very devout practicing Catholic and find extraordinary meaning in this piece. And I don't think it comes from even the smallest bit of intention to be offensive at all.
Well, let me ask you about a particular moment. Is the most sacrilegious moment in the piece the fraction? The fraction is when there's a breaking of the holy vessels.
Yes, which is a liberty that Bernstein took, because as we discovered, the wine is actually, the blood of Christ is actually in a metal
chalice,
which if you throw on the ground generally doesn't break. And in this case it's supposed to break. So either he was like the Superman priest, which brings a whole other,
There would be a challenge for the people looking at this play when the priest is going to throw the chalice, through the floor, and it's going to break. As a priest, I travel a lot around the world to go to different masses, and I remember going to Switzerland in Bern to a mass, and the priest. This is it's theological. It's a big theological argument for us Catholics. I remember in my first year when I got out of the seminary, they tell us we need to break the bread, before we sin. Especially when the priest say, and Jesus took the bread and broke it. the priest in the 70s will break the bread at that point. And then the church, no, you cannot break it there. See, the liturgy of the church have been changing through the years. And this priest in Switzerland, he really took the bread, and Jesus took the bread and he broke it. I said, I want to do the same, but I can't do that in the United States because the Commission of Bishops in the United States don't allow us to do that. But I go to Puerto Rico, I don't have a problem to do it because my Commission of Latin American Bishops is different. And there's this conflict of breaking the bread. Because a piece of drama to me is not sacrilegious.
Yes.
That is very important. It's a drama. It's not sacrilegious. It had to be some, piece of art. To me, the hard part to take is the violence with the priest respond to the people. That is for me sacrilegious. It's not just the breaking, it's the attitude the priests have in the play to get upset with the world, and he cannot stand by himself.
He loses it.
He loses it,
Yeah,
exactly.
He goes kind of crazy.
It's, for that point I say, he's in persona Christi, he can do that. That's for me the challenge as a priest.
But could I offer that maybe that whole section right there, and this is one of those metaphorical things. So what happens, we were talking about, he gets, the priest, who's the celebrant, becomes so upset with the congregation after they've rebelled that he hurls down the chalice and it breaks and the wine spills everywhere. And there's about a 10-minute sequence, a 12-minute sequence, one of the longest sustained sequences in the entire piece, where you're not going from aria to aria, where just the celebrant sings about what has happened. And nobody else is doing anything. Everybody else just sitting there, standing there, observing. And I almost think that rather than him preaching what he's saying, which is really wild and actually goes through every single piece that you've heard up until that point, all 20-something themes are reiterated by the celebrant in a very short space of time, referring to each of the members of his congregation. And I think almost that's actually not what he's preaching, but what he's imagining in his head. Like, that 12-minute chunk is actually just a few seconds of real time, where that's what went through his head. And we were discussing what the meaning, why does he throw the chalice? Because obviously the celebrant is a position of great spirituality. As a priest, he really believes this. He genuinely believes this.
Sometimes I want to do it, but I can't.
You can't do it. But I remember the story. This story came to me, and I'd forgotten about this. I was at a friend's house when I was about 7 years old, and I had this little porcelain dog that I just carried around everywhere that I loved. And I remember I was being picked up from the friend's house, and I really wanted to stay. I didn't want to go, and my mother came to go collect me, and she brought me my little porcelain dog. I was so upset at having to leave that on a reflex, it was the weirdest thing, I took the dog and threw it, and it broke. And it was so weird. Why did I couldn't think, why would I do that? Why would I do that? What would be the implication? I wasn't mad at the dog, for sure. And it was like, that is almost what's happened. He's not throwing the chalice because he doesn't believe in it, and he doesn't believe that's the blood of Christ. In fact, when he sees the wine on the ground, he says it really looks like blood a lot more than he ever thought it would. And I don't think he does it out of...
And remember, this chalice during the Catholic Mass that is going to be break will be the last cup at the Passover dinner.
Yes.
Which is the last cup at the Passover dinner. Therefore, have a very important meaning.
Which Elijah is supposed to,
Exactly.
drink from.
Correct.
That's right.
Cantor Lipp, you, in a conversation we had through email before this, you talk about how Mass has a very Jewish approach to the text of the liturgy. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean there?
Well, I guess what I mean, when I look at Catholic liturgy in general, it's not just the Mass. I see, and I hate to say this, but as long as you take Jesus out of it, there are actually a lot of commonalities. There are a lot of commonalities between Jewish liturgy and Catholic liturgy when it comes to the mercy of God, when it comes to praising God, when it comes to glory. I mean, there are all sorts of liturgical contexts that we do share in common. One of the issues that Teddy brought up, and also in terms of that aria that you're talking about, I think that one of the overarching themes, I think, that comes out of the Mass is that almost any religion goes through a process of some initial inspiration that goes viral, as it were, and that becomes very popular. And that's kind of what the simple song is. It's some simple, important idea that just everybody gloms onto and becomes part of. And then eventually you have to buy a building. And then you have to make the people who paid for the building feel good. And then you have to be careful. And then you have to create all sorts of institutional infrastructures, which in a sense are kind of very tame and and little by little you have to find ways, if you want this institution to keep going, to re-find that what becomes the secret song or the simple song, and reanimate that ability to fly again, as it were. And I think that one of the things that happens in that aria, and I think that you alluded to it, is in a sense the celebrant is forced to do what everybody else has done, whether you see it as internally or he actually dramatically goes through it. In a sense, he's been saying, this is what it is, we should have joy, everything is wonderful, this is what we're given by the religion, and people saying, yeah, but. And finally he goes crazy, throws the chalice down, he says, and he ends up in this aria going through it all. You can see it as he goes through it internally, you can see it as he goes externally, but finally what he comes back to is the simple song. He comes back to this notion of, this is really what it's all about. This is what animates, this is what inspires, this is what brings the hope, this is what brings peace.
That's a great insight. Is it worth playing the simple
Sure,
song?
play
Do you
it
think?
for us. Yeah, I think
so.
so.
You can hear,
Gorgeous.
because this, I can play it on the recording, so you can actually hear what the simple song sounds like. It's one of the most famous parts of the piece. What Cantor Lipp was referring to is it comes back at the very end as, here it is.
Sing God a simple song.
It's quite famous, actually. It's one of Bernstein's more famous songs.
As you go along. Sing like you like to sing. God loves all simple things.
Which is a good place to stop it. But I mean, if you notice, that is a very non-denominational. It's not even specifically a religious piece, other than the reference to God.
Right.
But it's actually a celebration of singing and music, and that comes back at the very end of the piece with the solo boy, who's like a young representation of the celebrant, who sings that. But it's not a simple song; it's a secret song, which I think is a really great way of looking at it when you consider what Cantor Lipp was just talking about, that it is in fact something secret that's been hidden, in other words, something that miit be hidden.
And it requires a child to remind you
Exactly.
of why you got into it in the first place.
Yes, yes.
We have a few minutes left because I know Teddy and both Cantor Lipp have to head out somewhere else. But I have a couple, maybe hopefully short answer questions for you that I think are kind of provocative. And one is, can we be shocked by Mass in 2015? And when the audience sees, will anyone actually be shocked by it? Or will we just accept it as, so what?
Oh my gosh, that's great. Well, I have to say, so I was, I'll make this brief, but I was at my other job, which is an orchestra festival in Southern Oregon. It's right next to where the Oregon Shakespeare Festival is, one of the great theater companies in the entire world. And I went to see a few plays like I do each summer. And there was an opening scene of a play there called Sweat, which was extraordinarily powerful. It was a scene between an African-American parole officer and a, well, obviously kind of neo-Nazi-ish white character who was on parole. And the parole officer was trying to get him to open up, and eventually he screamed the N-word, expletive. And the gasp that was heard in the entire theater was so real. It was not just theater anymore. It was so real, and immediately some people were like, "Oh my God!" It was all a reaction, and I thought to myself that that's possible, even though of course it was shocking and terrible. That could be an artistic product. That could be an artistic experience that these people were having in this era of shocking violence, easy screams, easy yells in mass media. Was really an amazing reminder that people could be so engaged with the work that it would elicit that kind of uncontrolled response. Mass is not supposed to be that kind of shocking response by any standard, but if we perform it well, when the chalice is thrown, and as the people rebel, you should be feeling that. As I always say, theater at its best means that you'll have an experience with it that is truly timeless. Your sense of the rest of the world should melt away, and you're living only in the dramatic experience that we're creating. And I hope that you sense that. I hope that whether or not, whatever your faith is, you experience that in that powerful way. It's meant to be.
Father Cantor, do you think we're going to be shocked by this at all?
I wouldn't say shocked for myself, or for my parishioners, as it were, but I would say, again, assuming that it's done as well as I assume it will be, I think it will be meaningful, and it will be deep, and it will be moving. I'm not sure shocked is the right term that I would have.
In the last years of BERNSTEIN, he have lectures in Harvard in phonology and linguistic, and he have a great presentation, I think in the second conference he gave, where he played note, and he told the student, note doesn't have a purpose. And that was, what? A note, a musical note doesn't have a purpose. And he explained why they don't have a purpose. I was getting very confused. But at the end he said that every person would experience the note in a different meaning. And I think this is going to happen in this presentation. Each one of us is going to have experience to talk about it. Can be shocking to some people, can be very fulfilling, or can be a moment of, oh, I need this moment in my life to find that peace. And I think this is what's going to happen with each one of us. We are going to have a personal experience with the composer.
If Leonard Bernstein were living today, and he had to write this piece for the first time in 2015, what do you think he would include in Mass in 2015? What kind of themes, what kind of music, what kind of elements would he include?
Part of the fact that Bernstein could write a piece like this was that Bernstein had created this charismatic persona that was so powerful, so relevant to society. I mean, he was considered an American hero. There really isn't an equivalent classical musician alive, and I can't call Leonard Bernstein a classical musician, even though maybe he was the consummate American classical musician. He was just a great musician. Yeah. There is nobody alive right now with that connection to our public. That has developed such a connection that he could throw in rock and roll, blues, atonal music, Renaissance polyphony, and somehow make sense of it, even if it did take a few generations to kind of sort out what that sense would be. There really isn't a Leonard Bernstein right now. The Yo-Yo Ma comes as close as anybody gets, but it's not the same thing because Bernstein was such a generative musician. He made so much music, and I don't know, maybe if there was one, maybe there'd be more rap. I mean, that might be the hip-hop.
I'd say rap, hip-hop.
Certainly, yeah.
I'd say there'd be breakdancing. I'd say there'd be capoeira.
Well, Alvin Ailey did the original dance choreography, and so...
Wow.
I'm afraid to answer, but I'm not sure. I think if you look at the people, and you are part of that generation of the 1970s, we become more conservative as we grow old. And I would be afraid to say he will be very simple as he ends the play, in a simplicity of music. And I'm in the middle. I was born in the 60s, okay? But I see my parents, they become more simple every day. And we don't say conservative, but they live to the moment. And that would be a big challenge. Even, I let it there, I don't want to go more deep, but yes, it will be more simple, I believe.
That's a great question, though, just because, I mean, you think, gosh, I mean, most classical composers alive today would be afraid. I mean, they'd be so afraid to be judged by every bit of this. I mean, if it wasn't by Bernstein, that was kind of my, if it didn't have Lenny's name on it, this would be so, it could be ridiculed so easily. What's that? What's the electric bass doing there? Why does it sound like fake, kind of white funk? What is going on? I mean, you could say that about almost every page, but you could also say every page is brilliant. And I think because it's Bernstein and we care for him, we say it's brilliant as it should be. But as another composer without that name and that...
couldn't get away with it.
You could not get away with it. It would be laughed at. And that's really sad. That's actually really tragic.
Yeah. Well, and it also, I think, speaks to the ability of a composer or artist who can't create these kinds of pieces that can create that kind of emotion, that kind of shock as this one did. We have about 10 minutes for questions now. Your turn to be a part of the conversation, and we have a runner here with a mic, so if you'll just raise your hand and I'll try and get to as many as possible. Then if you would say your name as well.
I'm Jill Cooper. Is it on?
Yeah,
it is.
Yes.
Yep.
Can you tell me how it was received when it was first performed?
It was panned by the New York Times. Yeah.
But that was not unusual for them.
Yeah,
That's,
maybe not.
and actually, this is an interesting point. The New York Times had gone through a relatively long period where they were panning large American musical productions. In fact, they panned Barber's operas, these large-scale populist, dramatic musical works produced from this country were not always well received at a time when the established composition world was usually extremely avant-garde. That was kind of the height of the dichotomy between populist music and the extreme avant-garde. That was when minimalism was becoming a very powerful force as a reaction against extreme avant-garde. But Bernstein was not in that camp at all. Bernstein was an obvious populist, even if he dabbled in all forms. And I think audiences must have been totally confused, though I can tell you what we're doing here. We have something like 60 microphones and dozens of ranks of speakers spread out everywhere, just so people can hear each other and get this piece together. The hall that this was written for, the Kennedy Center, was not yet constructed. So how on earth could they have possibly even thought about something like that when neither that technology existed nor did the hall exist? So, I mean, it must have sounded terrible.
Yeah.
It could not have sounded good. Every orchestra struggles with this today with all that technology, and they didn't even know what the place looked like. I'm convinced that half the bizarre stage directions are because they couldn't fit the thing on stage. They really couldn't.
Yeah.
So,
Other questions? If you would hold the mic up to
Well, going on at the Kennedy Center that wasn't completed in those days, how did Jackie Onassis react to this?
well, that's a good question, and it's kind of a funny story of how this piece was commissioned, because she originally asked Bernstein to be the chair of the board of the Kennedy Center, which, I mean, look, conductors, they're not chairs of boards. I mean, it's like asking me to be the chair of the board of the Kentucky Center of Arts. That'd be terrible. I mean, that's not what we do. But he had such respect for the Kennedys that he didn't want to say no. And finally, his wife, Bernstein's own wife, said, "You've got to call her back. You have to tell her you can't do it." And so, and he offered. He said, "But could I do something else?" And she said, "Well, why don't you write a piece for the opening?" Which turned into this, which he, completed. And I don't know her specific reaction.
I don't either. Yeah.
Nobody has said
Nobody
anything.
knows. I mean, I hope she liked it. I mean, but then again, I mean, it must have been a very confusing experience. Our director, who's directing it right now for us, the stage director, was there, and not only the initial performances, but some of the initial rehearsals, because the director who did this at its premiere was a friend of his and asked him to come and help advise. It's a pretty cool connection. And he said it was kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like everybody Bernstein could fit on stage, and even those he couldn't fit, he just kept involving. And I think as an artistic product, you need restrictions. You need limitations. You need to know what's possible and what's not possible. And nobody told Lenny no at that point in his career.
Well, Teddy, while there's maybe a lull in the questions, is Mass something you've been wanting to do for a long time? Has this been like a dream piece for you to program, and this is the right time to do it?
I actually would not say that. It wasn't one of those pieces that I just said, "Oh my God, I have to do," because it's not like a Mahler symphony, which everybody thinks is incredible, like Mahler's Second Symphony. Everybody is universally accepted as one of the great masterpieces. Every conductor wants to conduct that piece. It works right out of the box. All you have to do is rehearse and get it together. This is a piece of immense challenges. This is not a piece that works out of the box. This is like buying the most complicated Lego set with no instructions. and it's like, it's really different than buying the Lego set that puts it together in what like everybody wants. This is the one, this is the big box that they say, "Here, you make a city." And so I don't think anybody sits around dreaming of doing this piece. I think people finally say this is the right time and place for it. I thought it would be perfect for Louisville because of interfaith, because this is a compassionate community, as Mayor Fisher will say, and because this is the kind of challenge that takes an organization from here and says, "Here's what we can do."
Sure.
And you have the political aspect of this piece. We have no talk here, but the president then went to the premiere because the FBI tells you should not be there. They were expecting some variety inside. And it's like you here today and you listening to us, and you will be all in the FBI list tomorrow morning. And that's what that generation expected. You know, and that was a challenge for them even to go to the performance.
What a day when the FBI cared about
Isn't that interesting?
artistic
Well, he did host the
endeavors.
Black Panthers at his apartment once, but because he was very politically involved. But it just reminds me of that story when the Soviets and the Americans had an exchange. It was going to be some kind of exchange that they were going to try out to help thaw relations, and so the Americans selected some Soviet diplomat. They said they wanted to come and talk and do a tour, and they said, "Who would you like from America to go to the Soviet Union?" And the response was, the only person that we're actually interested in is Aaron Copland. They said, well, why? And because Aaron Copland, to the Russians, to the Soviets, actually meant something about American culture. They did not want a politician. They did not want a TV star. They wanted Copland because that voice right there, even though Copland was blacklisted and Copland was brought before the Un-American Commission, Copland, well, maybe that's what.
Maybe that's why.
Kindred spirits.
But
He had cred. He had Soviet cred.
But in all honesty, it's because Copland, more than anybody else that the Russians could think of, represented what America sounded like. And probably Bernstein's the same.
What are the questions? Keith?
I'm Keith Runyon, and I just couldn't help but think about those of us who were fortunate enough to grow up in Louisville in the 50s and 60s. And we were educated through Robert Whitney's making music concerts here in town, and then we would turn on the television and there would be Leonard Bernstein with his young people's concerts. And I think somehow it's fitting that it's the Louisville Orchestra that's taking this risk, and I just want to thank you and let you know that we're thrilled about it.
I think we have two hands over here in the middle and one down here. Okay. Oh, ready. Go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
I'm Don Stern, and I'm going to follow up with what Keith just said. I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I just want to thank you for bringing the fresh new stuff to Louisville that you have brought to us these last couple of years. I remember last year, I believe it was last year, you brought some colleagues from the Curtis Institute that you were friends with, and we heard music like we've never heard with the Louisville Orchestra. And it's wonderful to, you're making us stretch a little bit, and I want to thank you.
Oh, good. Well, Bernstein's a friend from Curtis, too.
Yeah, yes. Fellow Curtis.
Yeah.
Back here.
Not a question, but some observations. I feel that if Thomas Merton were here, he would approve of everything that you're doing. He was a great personal influence on the spiritual consciousness of the Kennedys. But he also made these observations about the relationship between Judaism and Christianity. He said that under my Catholic skin, I am a Jew. And in fact, he went further. He said, you cannot be a good Christian without first being a good Jew. Finally, he said, jazz is the new liturgy.
Wow. Well, I might just say that, and you'll see this in the staging, but we've actually, in this production, envisioned the celebrant as being kind of the spirit of Thomas Merton. And I don't want to give too much away, but hopefully, I'm sure you're all quite familiar with him and his appearance, and hopefully you'll see the connections that we're making in the production itself.
We have, I think, time for one more question. Back over here.
I want to thank you, too, for bringing some interesting works here to Louisville. I was fortunate enough to see a Mass at Lincoln Center.
In 2008?
Yeah, I saw the real thing. And I'm wondering, what made you decide not to include the dancers in this?
Well, there are actually a number of reasons. First of all, the actual time and way that dancing occurs in this piece is not very specific at all. Bernstein's ideas about what would be included in terms of dance, and even in terms of the roles of the singers themselves, was very nebulous and was never really scripted. So these are choices that have to be made every single production. Then there are just practical issues. If you have this street choir dance, then you have to teach musicians who do not dance to dance, and that's very risky and takes a very long time. And I mean, it would be about as likely to happen as having the orchestra dance too, and that's not going to happen. So that's number one, and then number two, there simply isn't space. There just is no place to put dance. We have 30 members of the street choir. It's one of the largest street choirs that's ever been done. That's because we have such a great choir tradition here in Louisville. The university, with Kent Hedderberg's incredible leadership, has produced extraordinary choirs. And so we have this rich talent of choral singing, which we're really utilizing. But almost every inch of the stage is taken up already with the drama, and there just wasn't I mean, the marching band already has to come in off the doors of the downstairs area because there's no place to put them on stage. So that's really why. And I think it will be okay. If you want to get up and dance,
You're welcome.
you're welcome to add that element in. But I think
Thank you to our panelists today, and thank you for attending. Thank you, of course, to the Center for Interfaith Relations and the Louisville Orchestra for presenting today's discussion. The Louisville Orchestra performances of Mass with Jubilant Sykes as celebrant are September 26th at 8 p.m. and September 27th at 3 p.m. in Whitney Hall, right here in the Kentucky Center for the Performing Arts. There is also a voucher for 25% off your tickets for Sunday, September 27th, if you don't have your tickets or you want to buy more, which I'm sure they would love for you to do. Thank you for being here this evening, and please stay for the reception and further conversation if you can.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
And I will see you tomorrow.
So I would like to thank Dan for a wonderful job moderating this conversation. And would it be too much to ask you could you play us out?
to come to see it, right? But I'll play you another. Thank you. Yeah, that was Some Other Time from On the Town. I think that, you know, if the simple song might be the quintessential Bernstein song for the Mass, Some Other Time really captures the spirit and mood, I think, of Bernstein's entire aesthetic. So I thought that would be fitting and a nice way to play it out. But please do come to Mass, and actually come twice, just because it is kind of once in a lifetime. It really is. I mean, I don't think any city except for DC has actually seen it twice. I think and there are only like 5 cities that have had a professional production in America. So this is a big deal. Anyway, and thank you so much. Thank you all for being a part of this. And this discussion was incredible. It just shows the rich talent and rich thinking that's going on in this city. So thank you very much.
tomorrow.